Hey guys, in this week's episode, we are talking about 3,000 Years of Longing. But before that, we're talking about the first couple episodes of She-Hulk on Disney+, as well as the first couple episodes of Welcome to Wrexham.
Nailed it.
So join us.
And welcome to the Casual Cinecast, powered by Cinelinx. My name is Chris, and with me as always is a man who I'm going to grant one wish. Mike, what would your wish be?
What would my wish be? I guess this isn't going to be very creative at all. I just want enough money to not do anything.
Mm-hmm.
It's that simple. That's all I want, is just enough money to not have to do anything ever or worry about anything.
Should have invested in GameStop.
Yeah, well.
Justin, the same question to you.
I wish that everyone's student loans were forgiven because it's the right thing to do.
Well, part of that was granted, I suppose.
Yeah, part of it.
Yeah.
No. But clearly not enough for Justin here.
No, I want it all to be gone for now and the entire future of post-high school education that you have to pay for.
Save it for Casual Politics, our spin-off podcast
with
Justin.
My bad. What show were we on?
All right, and if this is your first time listening, normally we like to start off every episode in a section called News on the March, where we talk about film and TV news, or more accurately, just the movies and TV that we have been watching. Then we move into the feature review, as you might have discovered from the opening, and Chris's wonderful segue. We'll be discussing 3,000 Years of Longing.
Mm-hmm.
Here on the Casual Cinecast, what we like to do is every other week we do a Casually Criterion episode. But the cool thing about it is that we let you, the listener, choose. So each of us pick a movie from the Criterion collection and we put it out on Twitter to the interwebs and we let you guys decide what we're going to watch. And then we watch it and we talk about it. What is this week's poll, Justin?
This week's poll is from last week's episode, and it's out right now. It probably won't be by the time that you're hearing this, actually. But the poll was based on the theme noir. Chris, I believe you chose Kurosawa's High and Low. I chose Rafifi. And Mike, you chose The Asphalt Jungle. So one of those will win. I don't know which. I bet High and Low.
Yeah, that's my guess.
But yeah, you can go vote in. Well, I guess you can't go vote in that poll, but follow us on Twitter. That's where you can vote in the poll. That's the best place to follow us. We are on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at Casual Cinecast. If you want to send us any messages, questions about the movies you're reviewing, you can send a message to any of those social media accounts. Hop into those DMs. You can also email us at casualcinemedia@gmail.com. And then, of course, if you haven't done so already, you like the show, you want to help other people find it, let us know. We are a good show worth checking out. Give us a 5-star review, 10-star review, 12-star review. I could go all day.
Go to 11.
That's less than 12, though.
I know. You shouldn't have gone. But the 11 works with a Spinal Tap joke, and 12 doesn't, so I had to think quickly.
12 is a Spinal Tap's dozen.
1 million stars.
All right, let's get out of this section because this is rough.
Okay.
All right.
Where are we going? News on the March?
Yep. Yep. I thought that was implicitly.
We're off to a great start, guys.
Yeah.
News on the March!
All right. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining me here in News on the March. I believe the first thing we have to talk about is something that I have not seen, but both of you guys have, or at least started, right? How many episodes are out right now?
I think 2. As we're recording, another one either comes out today or tomorrow.
Ah, perfect.
But we're at 2 so far.
Good. I'm glad we timed this well.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So, Justin, why don't you kick us off? Because I think you're the resident soccer/football nerd on the podcast.
I think so. I can confidently say that. And I guess I usually introduce all these soccer shows that I make you listen to, Mike. So
I cherish all of them.
I hope so. That's why we come up here.
I love listening to you talk about a soccer show.
Yeah. Well, hold on. because we're going to talk about
Buckle up. Yeah.
a soccer show that came out on Hulu this last week. And weirdly enough, compared to most, it actually has people you've probably heard of in it compared to other soccer shows I've talked about, which is Ryan Reynolds and Rob McElhenney.
Oh my gosh, that's just the thing to get me into this.
Yeah. Anyways.
Two beloved American actors.
Yeah. Well, anyways, the show's called Welcome to Wrexham, and it is a documentary about Ryan Reynolds and Rob McElhenney buying this football/soccer club in England. They're one of the oldest soccer clubs in England. I'm just going to say soccer from here on out, by the way.
I think you could say football. I could tell it hurts you to say soccer.
It doesn't. I say soccer all the time.
Yeah, okay.
But yeah, I'm just going to say soccer. But anyways, it's one of the oldest soccer clubs in the world. It is in the 5th tier of like the competitive leagues. So it's way down there. It's, you know, not doing very well. It's basically just like one tier above where you like dip into like the amateur leagues, right? So they're just barely professionals there, and they're not making much more than like you or I make, probably. But they buy this club with the idea of like, let's return this to glory. It's got a great story. It's one of the oldest clubs. Like you have like an underdog comeback story, and we can facilitate that. And probably we could also make a cool documentary that will make us money as well from it. It was probably part of the thinking, in my opinion.
Sure.
For sure.
But that's it. So it's just following them, and they've never owned a sports team or a soccer club before. I'm not sure how familiar with soccer they are. They're just kind of big sports guys.
Yeah.
But I'll just start with my opinion on it. I think it's pretty good if you're interested in soccer. I think if you're not, you have people who are, you know, professionally entertaining on camera in Ryan Reynolds and Rob McElhenney that make it pretty watchable. I think it kind of gives it a bit of a lowest common denominator for like the diehard soccer fans. So like for myself, I find it to be a little less interesting than some of the other ones that I've watched that kind of dive more into the weeds, where this is kind of pretty general. And it's also, they're shorter episodes. They're only like 30 minutes each, so they don't really dive into a whole ton of what I find the most interesting, at least not yet. There's obviously more to come. But yeah, I'm enjoying it. Chris, you've seen it. What do you think as the non-soccer fan?
Yeah. You know, I've watched a lot of these soccer documentaries, or two, because of you.
It's a lot for some people.
Yeah. And I really enjoy them. What was the one that we watched that was about it was kind of like a Hard Knocks style? They were all in there, and there's like 2 seasons of it, but then they kind of got rid of the documentary crew.
Yeah, that was the Sunderland Till I Die that was on Netflix.
Sunderland Till I Die, I think, is my favorite thus far. And the reason being is because it kind of showed how important that these teams are to the community and the history that these teams and communities have tied together, right? And that's here in Welcome to Wrexham as well. Like you said, it's the oldest oldest club. They've been around like what feels at least 100 years, right? Like
more than 100.
Yeah. So people have been, you know, and the other thing that's really cool about this too is, you know, like American sports teams, sports ball teams, like even here in Dallas, there's, you know, like the Cowboys, and there's the Texas Rangers and the Mavericks. They're all in a city of like millions of people, right? I can see why it would be so important to a small community of 65,000 people, which is how many people are in Wrexham. It's a very small community compared to, you know, Dallas.
Yeah.
So it's really cool. And that's the aspect of it that I really like. And I was actually kind of dreading, for reasons that Mike had pointed out, the Ryan Reynolds aspect and Rob McElhenney aspect.
I haven't pointed them out on the podcast yet.
Oh, yeah. I'll let Mike point them out later. But spoiler, they were good points, but I was not upset by them. I'm going to spoil it. Well, you tell me, Mike. What was your worries about Rob McElhenney and Ryan Reynolds?
that the show would be focused on them trying to be cute and funny.
Yeah, I don't think that's a problem.
And not really paying respect to this really old institution that I assume a lot of people like live and breathe, you know, and like it's really important to them. Like from an outside perspective and having not seen the show, what I was going to ask is basically, is this just a big commercial for like these two American comedians, or does it feel like respectful, and how do the locals seem to treat them, and like what is like, does the show dive into the opinion of locals who are skeptical of their intentions or their knowledge or whatever, right? Is this just like Ryan Reynolds watched Ted Lasso and was like, I can do something like that?
All right, I'll answer that. So I think that is part of what the documentary does address, is there is some skepticism from, you know, the locals, the fans, and the club itself is fan owned. So
which is awesome.
Yeah. So like the board is made up of fans, right? And they have to present to the board their plans, their ideas or whatever, and then get an approval and get like a majority vote in order to actually be able to take over the club. So it does address that, like what their thoughts are and their concerns about whether or not they're going to take it seriously or whether or not they're just, you know, doing a PR thing.
Right. Okay.
And as far as them being cute, I think that you're getting the natural Rob McElhenney. Maybe there's a little bit of TV, like cameras. There's cameras here, so let's goof off a little bit. But you're getting the natural Ryan Reynolds and Rob McElhenney. Like, it seems like
the fear
Ryan
is
Reynolds
more directed at Ryan
nervous.
Reynolds.
Huh?
The fear is more directed at Ryan Reynolds. I find, I like him as a person. He seems like a perfectly fine, happy, normal, polite guy. But like, his personality to me, like, does seem to be like, I don't know how to not be
cute. Yeah.
Yeah. Like purposefully adorable.
Yeah, it's not Deadpool buying the team, you know, like he's not doing constant quips,
okay.
Which is something I would expect from Ryan Reynolds. It's hard to distinguish Ryan Reynolds and Deadpool because it's kind of Ryan Reynolds' like persona, like
right,
a public
like he
persona.
even did that in that movie where he meets his little kid self that came out
Young
on Netflix.
Adam?
Yeah, no, what's the name of the
Adam
movie?
Project?
Yes, there you go.
Oh yeah, Adam Project. Young Adam's actually the one with Tilda Swinton. But yeah, anyways. But yeah, so I think, and this is just the first 2 episodes, so it's kind of just barely getting into it. Like, so I don't know exactly what's going to happen. Like, neither one of them have actually, like, they're still in the middle of COVID, so like neither one of them have really like visited, I don't think, or like seen a game yet, and they have owned the team for a while at this point. So we're still in the middle of COVID as far as all that stuff goes, but I'm really interested. And, you know, the biggest thing was I was disappointed that there was only 2 episodes out, because something like this oftentimes feels better as like, you know, there's 8-10 episodes and they're half-hour long just to binge it all down, you know?
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm definitely interested in it. And enjoying it, you know, like as long as they keep up with more of the community, because I think that's really what, like, Sunderland Till I Die, and then this one is really what I find the most interesting, you know.
Right.
So
and to that point, I think what makes these documentaries about soccer in other countries more interesting than documentaries about, like, you know, American sports teams, right? We have documentaries about football teams and basketball teams, and what's interesting is the promotion relegation system that they have, right? Is that you can be a club in the 5th tier, almost non-professional, and if you win the league or finish high enough in the league and win promotion, theoretically you can go from the bottom and then be up in the top tier, like basically like the NFL or the NBA of soccer in England, and still be that club from a town of 65,000 and be like top level, which is impossible in American sports.
And also, I think they do a really good job of explaining the tier system, which is probably one of the things you found somewhat tedious, you know, for like a hardcore soccer fan. But they do a really good job of like bringing the uninitiated in, kind of like from the viewpoint of like Rob McElhenney. And it seems like that he is the one that's kind of the driving force behind the purchase. And Ryan Reynolds is kind of the money man. He's got more money and he can help out by purchasing it. So that's kind of...
Yeah, it's even one of the jokes I liked where he's like, I was interested in this, but I have TV money. He's like, I need movie star money.
And he's like, I need superhero money.
Superhero money. So yeah, you're right. But
I did find it fun and interesting, and I'm looking forward to more of it.
Yeah, well, maybe we'll follow up later if it's worth talking about by the end. I think one of the things about this one versus some other ones that follow bigger teams is that this being in like the 5th tier, I have no idea what has happened to this team. So like, obviously they're shooting the documentary and then they're editing, and by the time they release it, we're watching a season that's already come and gone. And if we wanted to, we could look up what happens, but it's very far off my radar of whether or not they are successful in, like, you know, making the team play better and getting them up to the next league or whatever. So this is one of the rare sort of like sports documentaries where I really have no idea what's to come.
Yeah, real life hasn't spoiled it for you.
Yeah. So that's exciting. But I don't have anything else unless you do.
Mike, what would it take you to watch this? Or be interested?
Oh, goodness. Geez.
Okay.
I wish
that's answer enough.
Can I take my wish back? I wish that Mike got interested in watching this.
Here's the thing.
At the beginning.
How long are the episodes again?
30 minutes.
30 minutes.
All right. How many episodes are there going to be?
I have no idea.
Oh, okay. Well, here's the thing. Okay, if you guys get to the end of this season and you guys want to do a follow-up and you say it's worth it, I'll watch it.
I also think if you watch the first 2 and you're like just bored, that's a good, signifier. And you could even, when we do a follow-up, you could even just be like, look, guys, I gave it the first 2 episodes and I'm just not into it.
Yeah. I promise if you guys want to do a follow-up, I will watch at least the first 2 episodes and I will try to watch more.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of really good TV coming down the pipeline. And
that's true as well.
Yeah. This is just a documentary about soccer at the end of the day, so.
True. I mean, it's a documentary about people owning a club, which is not as much about I feel like it's less focused on the on-field and a little bit more focused on behind the scenes, what goes on. And
thus far.
Them learning that. So
yeah, I mean, like, the thing is, if I'm going to watch it, though, I would rather it be about the team, I don't know.
Okay,
we'll
that's
see.
interesting. I figured it'd be the other way around, but it looks like there's 9 episodes, by the way.
Okay, that sounds digestible at 30 minutes each.
Yeah.
To answer your question, I'm still like, even though you say the documentary addresses it, I still don't really know if I am sold on these 2 particular people being the ones that I'm following through this whole journey.
Yeah. Well, you'll find out pretty early on if that's working for you or not.
Yeah.
So you won't have to sit through the whole thing to figure that out.
I'm not even sure that especially in the second episode, it kind of pulls away from them a little bit. Sure, they pop up, but it doesn't feel like we're following them as much as we're following the team. So if that's any...
They're like the judges on the Great British Bake Off. Is that what you're saying? Like, they're there, they're omnipresent throughout the whole thing, but really where it shines is the little people.
Yeah. Words can't express how happy I am to hear you drop a Great British Baking Show reference.
Yeah.
That makes me so happy. I feel proud.
We got everything in for Justin in here today. Great British Bake Off, soccer.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I don't watch many reality shows unless people like sit me down to watch them. So that's like my only reference in the last like 3 years of a reality show.
Well, it worked beautifully.
Thank you.
And it put me in a good mood. So
good.
Let's end this conversation on a high note and move on. I'm going to toss it to you, Mike, though, since Chris and I kind of most of the talk about our next thing.
Okay. Was that the toss?
That was the toss.
All right. Okay. So She-Hulk is on Disney Plus. I believe a new episode will be out by the time this episode is published, but as of right now, it's just the first 2. We didn't talk about it last week because only 1 episode had premiered by the time we recorded, and we didn't really think the first episode was going to be representative of what the series ended up being. And I still don't know if that's true or not based on episode 2, but they were different. We were right about that.
Yeah. Well, it feels like the story of She-Hulk Attorney at Law finally starts in episode 2.
Yeah. Yeah. Based on the first 2 episodes, this show is okay. I don't like it as much as I've wanted to after the first episode. I hate to jump on this bandwagon because I know it's like low-hanging fruit, but it is a problem. The special effects in this don't look very good.
Yeah, that was the biggest drop-off for me between episode 1 and 2, the thing that really stuck out. It feels like they put more work into episode 1 to hook you, I guess.
Yeah, I didn't have that complaint in episode 1, which is why that particular criticism caught me off guard in episode 2 while I was having it. I was like, what? It's letting me down in a way I didn't expect, you know?
Yeah.
That said, that's not the only thing that I had a problem with in episode 2. I think a lot less of the humor lands. Mm-hmm. And the thing is, like, I want to like this. Like, you know, I want to like a woman lawyer also dealing with being a Hulk and like how that's different than the journey Bruce had, you know? So anyways, yeah. I'll leave it off there. I don't entirely hate it. I'm going to keep watching. But the first episode, in my opinion, was just the right amount of fun. And the second episode, while still fun overall, and I like the overall story that's happening so far, the scene-to-scene dialogue and jokes and the special effects are really starting to weigh on me, I guess. So, Justin, what do you think?
I mean, I'm pretty much right there with you. I actually walked away from the second episode. I think I texted you and I was like, was that second episode actually bad? And I think we kind of talked it through. I don't know if I would go as far to say it's bad. There was kind of a knee-jerk reaction, but there were certainly things that felt bad to me, like the CG, like just some of the humor, some of the just like the pacing of the way that the story played out. Just I don't know. It didn't really feel very natural, like right to me. It felt I don't know, it felt forced in places, especially the humor.
Well, first of all, here's something I didn't say. Tatiana Maslany, who's playing She-Hulk, great.
Yeah.
She's got all the charisma in the world, and I love her. She's really good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Some of the supporting cast around her, especially some of the men characters, I don't know if it's the actors. I don't think so. I think it's probably just the scenes that they're in. They're a little too much, I think.
There's a scene with her dad that felt really odd to me.
Yeah.
I don't know if y'all remember that.
I was thinking specifically of a scene with a coworker.
Yeah. I'm wondering, just on a personal level, if my reaction to this is just maybe disappointment from having higher expectations, because I think just the branding of the show and just the whole concept, which I didn't really know was a real comic book concept until a few nights ago. My wife and I are watching The Big Bang Theory, which is controversial because people hate it, but we like it, whatever.
Deal with it.
Yeah. But that show's been over for a while, but we're not all the way through. But kind of one of the middle seasons, they're talking about She-Hulk attorney at law. So I realized suddenly that this was actually a canon thing and not some cool Disney idea.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things that probably couldn't exist without a decade's worth of comic book properties coming before it.
Yeah, and I didn't know that, so the concept to me seemed really cool and unique and weird and bizarre, even more maybe campy and goofy than, WandaVision seemed initially. But I think that uniqueness made me really excited for She-Hulk. I thought it was going to be something really different. Probably more excited than I was for any other Marvel show to date. So maybe I'm coming from a place of like having too high of hopes for this just being super fun and super goofy and super campy, and it's just not working. But yeah. Maybe that's where I'm at.
What do you think, Chris?
Yeah.
I don't think I'm far off of you guys. I think I may be having Marvel fatigue a little bit. I was so excited for a lot of these shows, and I don't know that any of them have like reached my expectations. Maybe now that my expectations are much lower, they can. So maybe that's on me. I don't have the problem necessarily with the second episode that you guys do. I think mainly that's because of Tatiana Maslany. I think she is really charming, and I like watching her do her stuff. The other thing is, I think things I'm like reading or hearing about, so, on the internet, so whether it's true or not, I guess take it with a grain of salt, but like there's a lot of like that first episode wasn't supposed to be the first episode, essentially. That was going to come much later in the season. And that they've also like kind of like went and reshot a bunch of stuff, like giving her excuses to not be She-Hulk, which is probably a good idea if it doesn't look great, which it doesn't always look great. And also, but it also had more to do with the budget. They're like, we don't want to spend this much money. So they're kind of like, they've gone back and like fidgeted with a lot of stuff. And I think I see what the show could have been. And it could have been that version of, like WandaVision, where it's just a lawyer show to start off with. She's like, I'm a Hulk, I'm a lawyer, and that's what I'm doing, like as opposed to giving the origin story right off the bat. I don't know. I think in all, this is different enough from Marvel. I don't know if you guys saw Miss Marvel, which kind of has the same vibe. That was different. And that was what I appreciated about it. Kind of tried to carry a lot of other stuff too, but it was different enough that it was satisfying in that way. If that makes sense.
Yeah. Did we talk about Miss Marvel on the show?
If we did, I wasn't here.
No, I think Justin, you and I talked about it.
Yeah. Okay. I couldn't remember if we could go back if you wanted our full thoughts on it, but yeah, I like Miss Marvel for the most part. At least like half of the series I think is really great.
Yeah, there's some good cinematography in there too. I'm hoping that once we kind of get past the beginning part where it feels like there was the most like studio interference, if you want to call it that, they can hit their stride, which I'm hoping for.
Here's the thing about Miss Marvel, She-Hulk, maybe She-Hulk remains to be seen, but all of the Marvel shows so far, with the exception of maybe Loki. And some of these shows I like. I like WandaVision. I like, Loki. I'm not above these shows. I would say more than half of these shows would have been better as movies.
Sure. Yeah.
Miss Marvel included. I think Miss Marvel started off great. But then, whenever it starts to get into the stuff that's not as great, you got to wait 3 more weeks to kind of like wrap up the story. And it's like, with these movies, the last act is usually the worst anyway. So
sure, yeah.
It's like stretching out the last act for weeks. And
they would start off really strong.
Right. And so whenever it starts to get into the weaker elements of these stories, you can't just breeze through it in 20 minutes like you can with the movies, and then be out of the theater.
And a lot of that has to do with, I feel like, this extra burden of being a Marvel product. They have to bring Kingpin in, or they have to do this extra work that if you weren't tied to Marvel, you wouldn't have to do, and you could tell your story without having to bring in these extra elements that kind of weigh your product down, or the product or the movie or the story.
Yes and no, because that's kind of part of the fun of the universe. So it's like the more standalone it is, the more it could seem kind of like isolated from everything else, kind of like Moon Knight. Like, sure. I think ultimately Moon Knight feels disappointing to me because it's so standalone.
That's funny.
And it wasn't worth it for me to just sit through just for a story about this one guy. It's like, kind of how I felt. Like,
I got to expedite my stories. Get like 2 or 3 good stories in there.
Well, it's like at least link it in with something that like I know. It's like at this point, I don't care about any one property or character enough to sit through 8 episodes of just them. And and I don't know if that's a fault of like just the MCU as a thing or what, but right now I'm not invested in any of these characters enough for them not to feel more like part of the overall story anymore. Like I feel like there's too many characters. It's too big.
Yeah.
I don't know.
That may be kind of where we're at in the Marvel universe. Like I think this whole like this year's Marvel movies, I haven't seen Thor yet. Have been somewhat disappointing. Like, I like Doctor Strange. There's aspects to it that I like, but it's not.
See, I don't know. Me personally, I think Doctor Strange was the strongest movie since the last Avengers movie. which, I mean, I guess isn't saying much. That's
That
the new
may
phase.
be, but yeah.
But the thing is, I had fun with that movie. It worked
Sure.
as both a Doctor Strange story and a Wanda story. It continued each of their arcs. Like, that's what I want. I don't want, like, if you're gonna, like, you have so many characters that you can use some of them as villains now, or they can square off or complement one another's stories. Like, in my opinion, I think Doctor Strange is like, I know that's like a controversial thing because I know the internet has their opinions on that movie, but that's the MCU doing it right, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think
Right-ish.
I like when they're like filling out and sort of like adding more to the macro picture of the MCU, you know, and it was the thing that kind of kept me from watching Miss Marvel for a while because it seemed like the least connected, you know, and although I did watch Moon Knight as it was coming out, I kind of had to be talked into it by you guys because I wasn't very excited about it because it wasn't like directly filling out that picture. And to me, the most interesting part of She-Hulk thus far has been the introduction of a character we've met in previous movies. And I don't necessarily want to spoil it.
Sure.
But when that is brought in and it starts to, you start to connect and like pull out. I mean, I guess the first episode had that too, but someone unexpected, I guess I'll say.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's what the parts that did work about Falcon and Winter Soldier, I think that was it.
Mm-hmm.
Is whenever it started to kind of like pick up the baton from things that were already set up. So I don't know. It's both a blessing and a curse. I think it's just, maybe it is Marvel fatigue. I don't know. But I think, Justin, you said it best in a Slack conversation a few weeks ago. I think the amount of TV shows is just too much.
Yeah.
Like, no one needs more than 3 shows a year. That's too much.
Well, it's like so many shows, and then they're still coming out with the same amount of movies, right?
Yeah.
And it's just,
it's, you know, like the breadth of the MCU is just getting so large. And I know that, like, it's all, a lot of this will seem like paid off when the next Avengers movie happens, and
hopefully
you've got everyone from WandaVision and everyone from Falcon and Winter Soldier and everyone from She-Hulk. You know what I mean? Like, everyone who's anyone's going to be in those movies.
Yeah.
And I'm sure we'll look at these a little differently, maybe, then. But right now, it just seems like it's growing and growing. And I was satisfied with the amount of characters like 3 shows ago.
Yeah, it may be kind of like if you had told me that I would have loved the Avenger like cap off, the Infinity War and Endgame so much in like phase 1 of the Marvel universe, I would have probably laughed at you. I mean, I think the Endgame and Infinity Wars are up there with like, as far as like crowd pleasing, cheerful moments, you know, like up there with like Star Wars and stuff for me, you know, like, but I think we have to build up to that. So we may be on the ground floor of the next phase, and it just feels a little awkward right now. And hopefully things can get righted. There's a COVID of it all too, where like things got all wonky because things got released differently, and Spider-Man got released in a spot that it wasn't supposed to, and stuff like that.
Right. But I think that's where the fatigue is, from 6 episodes per series to introduce a character that's gonna pay off way down the road. Like it's the movie thing, right? Like it should be a movie, right? Like sitting through an hour and a half to 2 hours to learn a character's backstory and then eventually have the payoff is a lot more palatable, and I think a lot less fatiguing than 6 30 to 45 minute episodes, which ends up being, you know, between 3 and 4 hours.
Yeah, I think it worked with something like WandaVision, or even though it's not my favorite show, Falcon and Winter Soldier, because there were so many moving parts and you had to introduce more things and kind of set up what's to come. But something that amounts to just an origin story, let's keep it to movies, I think. I think it's stronger.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. We got way off of She-Hulk, but the thing is, I'm going to watch the rest of it.
Me too.
I don't know at what point I'm out on Marvel, you know, but, you know, like, I kind of wish there was like, all right, these are the characters that are going to be in the, new Avengers movie or whatever, right? These are the characters that are going to matter, and I can skip the other ones. But right now I feel like I'm having to do a chore by watching. I'm like, well, they're going to matter later, so I got to watch these now, otherwise I'll fall behind. So it kind of feels like a chore to watch all of them. And that's, I guess, the Marvel fatigue. But.
Yeah, well, like I think they're planning for more than just Avengers movies. Like there's something called the Thunderbolts coming down the way.
Sure.
Which is like a different team besides the Avengers. So it's like they're building the world out for more than just the next Avengers movie.
Sure.
Yeah. Isn't there the Marvels or something like that?
Yeah, that's basically Captain Marvel 2, I think, works as a sequel to Miss Marvel as well.
Yeah.
And Blade's coming along, and Jon Snow's like part of that too.
Yeah.
It's like the vampire
right.
aspect
so
of
I think
Marvel.
Stuff is going to start paying off.
Sure.
So maybe we'll be singing a different tune a year from now, but right now, just like I don't know, less origin shows, please.
Okay, this is the last thing, but this is the other thing I was thinking about. Like yesterday in the shower, I was thinking like about all the directors essentially. And I was like, who are our young directors? And because we got Martin Scorsese, we got a bunch of older directors, and maybe this is ignorance on my part, but it feels like all the younger directors that we're putting out new and interesting stuff are all doing Marvel movies, which is fine, and they can do new and interesting stuff within that those confines, but sometimes it's too restrictive, so, I don't know. I feel like they're robbing us of a generation of filmmakers.
Possibly.
We'll see.
But I mean, there's so much content coming out everywhere. I think there are good directors, but the directors you're talking about are the ones who they may dive into the studio system for something like Marvel or Star Wars or whatever, but they also want to work for A24. They want to they'll find a way to get content out if they have a story to tell, I think. And those directors will rise to the surface, but the film landscape's so different now. Like Scorsese couldn't make all the movies he made.
He barely got the ones he wanted to make, that he didn't
right.
make.
Like we're never going to find another Scorsese. The industry's too different, you know?
Sure.
So I think it's just we have to cherish the filmmakers that came before and then just kind of adapt to what the new thing is. Like now you have I think Matt Reeves is a great director.
Sure.
He did the Batman, he did the Planet of the Apes movies, but I think he realizes to make the movies he wants, he has to work in big IP.
Yeah, I was actually listening to this completely contradicts my point, but it's worth pointing out. I was listening to something about the history of film, right? And it was talking about the what was the name of the code?
The Da Vinci Code.
No, it was the code where you couldn't have sex and stuff on screen.
The Hays Code,
yeah, the Hays Code, and it's suggested that the Hays Code actually brought in a bunch of creativity because sometimes with constraints, you become more creative to move around those constraints. So who knows?
Right.
Maybe this is like the Hays Code, except for superheroes.
I think maybe we're getting there just because of the way that Doctor Strange 2 ended up being such a Sam Raimi movie, or
sure,
the Batman was 7, but guys is a superhero movie, or even though it's not a very liked movie nowadays, but the Joker was in a 70s Scorsese movie,
right?
But disguised as Joker, and the next one's going to be a musical. So,
it's like Westerns. Superheroes are like what Westerns were throughout the 40s and 50s, right? For a while, half of everything that was made was basically a Western.
Sure, yeah.
And then by the time that the Western bubble burst, you were getting things like The Wild Bunch, and you were getting, interesting stuff. Even, I think some of the death rattles were Unforgiven, you know?
A subversion of the genre, interesting new things, and even the Gunfighter, which we talked about last week, was a subversion of the genre, but it was at the very beginning, of the genre. So maybe those tropes hadn't been put in place yet, but there's still interesting things to come out of this.
Sure. All right. Well, with that, I think we've exhausted enough MCU talk.
Yeah. And the state of the film industry.
Indeed.
Big stuff.
Yeah. Okay, so here comes our feature review for 3,000 Years of Longing.
My name is Alethea. My story is true. I am a solitary creature by nature. I have no children, no siblings, no parents. I did once have a husband. If there is fate, who can say? But in the Grand Bazaar of Istanbul, I chose a memento. I like it. Whatever it is, I'm sure it has an interesting story.
So, what will you wish for?
What is your heart's desire?
I do have a question. What does one do with 3 wishes?
You'll see.
Oh. There's no story about wishing that is not a cautionary tale.
We all have desires, even if they remain hidden from us. But it is your story, and I cannot wait to see where it goes.
Oh, how it might end. Hello. Hello. He'll be staying for a while. I'm beginning to wish we'd never met.
Don't say that! Make a wish! Save yourself!
I have a wish.
All right, so as always with our newer films, we will be doing a spoiler-free section up front. We're going to be giving our general thoughts on 3,000 Years of Longing without diving into spoilers. And before we do dive into spoilers, we'll give you a warning, play a bumper so that you have plenty of time to pause the podcast, go watch the movie, come back, and finish listening.
That's right. So 3,000 Years of Longing was directed by George Miller. It stars Tilda Swinton and Idris Elba. The IMDb synopsis says, a lonely scholar on a trip to Istanbul discovers a djinn who offers her 3 wishes in exchange for his freedom.
Classic.
Yep. That is a synopsis.
Yep.
All right. Okay,
Cool.
So who wants to kick us off on their thoughts on 3,000 Years of Longing? I vote Chris because I think we've talked the most, Justin, it feels like.
Yeah.
And so Chris, George Miller, first movie since Fury Road, 3,000 Years of Longing. What did you expect, and did this movie meet that?
Oh, that's interesting. What did I expect? Last night, Justin was talking about how he was going to see the movie and he had no idea what it was about. And I think I had a little bit more of an idea of what it was about, but I don't know that I had a lot of expectations. I think I kind of heard some negative things about the film. But overall, I didn't have a lot of expectations going into this film. I like Tilda Swinton. I like Idris Elba, and thought it would be interesting. I think that this movie, at least the first 2/3, is visually really great. Basically what happens, and I don't think this is a spoiler, but the djinn ends up telling his stories to Tilda Swinton's character, which is kind of probably also very COVID related, since there's only 2 people in the room and he ends up telling stories, right? A COVID constraint. But it kind of reminded me of The Fall, because he's telling these stories and then we cut away to these kind of beautiful, magnificent shots and scenes and very colorful.
I also thought of The Fall.
Yeah, stories that were being
to.
told as good.
It's difficult not to think of The Fall.
Yeah, sure. But the best thing of the fall was those shots when the cutaways to the story and the beautiful shots. And I think maybe that's the same thing here. I'm not sure. I've just recently seen it, so I'm still digesting it. But I think the other thing that would be really great is Idris Elba and Tilda Swinton. Their performances, I think, is pretty magnificent. I think I could continue watching them just tell stories to each other for a long time. I found it really fun to watch them. Ultimately, I think that there's like 2 or 3 things that this movie could be about, and I'm not exactly sure where I've fallen on that, but I'm sure we'll get into that later. Yeah, I liked it. I enjoyed this movie. Yeah, you should probably go watch it, especially in the theater. I think it's really worthwhile, visually speaking, at the very least, and for the performances of Idris Elba and Tilda Swinton.
Yeah. Did you guys get
Justin?
that
oh, go ahead.
The pre-message from George Miller before the movie saying thank you for watching it in the theater?
Yep.
Okay. I was wondering if because I saw it at the Alamo Draft House, and sometimes they have like special things beforehand, and wanted to make sure it was just me.
Yep, I think it was in all the theaters. But what did you think, Justin?
Well, quite often on the show we agree a lot, and today is going to be an episode where we don't, because I did not like this movie very much.
Which isn't necessarily surprising if you reminded you of The Fall.
Yeah. So I don't really love that movie either. And I think you're right that the best thing about both movies is the sort of the visuals, just like enjoying it from a purely visual aesthetic place. Because that's what I did enjoy most about this movie. And to the question of what did you expect going in, I didn't know anything about the plot at all. I couldn't remember anything about what it was about. I kind of figured out pretty quickly sitting in the Alamo because they do a lot of pre-roll, and a lot of it was genie stuff and djinn stuff and the history of the djinn stories. So I kind of figured that was going to be an element. But I did expect good-looking visuals from George Miller, because that's kind of what he's shown that he can do, especially with Fury Road. That seems to be his forte. The rest of it, I don't know. I felt like some things happened very quickly without much setup and didn't feel very earned. And they were pretty important things to the story. And then I felt like other moments just got drug out to the point of, like, I get it. I get what's happening here, and I get where this is going. And they kind of call it out sometimes in the movie. Tilda Swinton is a person who studies story, so sometimes she's ahead of him. And then I think we're also ahead of her too, as an audience. And I think I was very perplexed by the movie, and then it all kind of clicked into my head when, in the end credits, I saw that this was based on a short story. And to me, that's ultimately what this feels like, is a short story stretched out to the length of a movie, without, in my opinion, doing a great job of filling those gaps in to make it feel worthwhile as a movie. I think what will be most interesting to talk about this movie is what it's about and the themes. And that's kind of the beauty of a short story to me, is you get these strong themes and you can think about those, but you don't got to really spend a lot of time to get there. And this movie does spend a lot of time to get to the same place. Some of the same places that like the short version of this does, or the short version of any sort of like genie granting 3 wishes story. So I don't know. I felt a lot of times I was pretty bored and wanting to check my watch or my phone to see like how much time had passed and how much time I could guess until the movie was over. Like I had that urge multiple times throughout this movie. And I don't even, to me, I don't know if I was just not vibing with the movie, but I didn't even think the performances were that good. Like I felt a lot of acting going on and didn't feel very natural to me, despite Tilda Swinton and Idris Elba generally being pretty great. But there's a kind of almost across the board, other than like cool visuals at times, I there was not really much that was clicking for me on this movie. So that's where I'm coming from. I suppose for now I can leave it there and toss it over to Mike. What do you think, Mike?
Yeah, so this movie, I also entered this without a whole lot of expectation. I knew Idris Elba was like a genie, but I didn't know, I didn't even know what genre this was going to be. And I still don't. Now that I've left it, I don't know what the genre is, but
I agree with that.
I will say that for 2/3 of this movie, I was enjoying myself quite a bit.
Yeah.
I get into the exact moment that I think the movie loses its momentum later, but yeah, all the stories I really enjoyed. All there's a section where it talks about how his little bottle, his little lamp, whatever you want to call it, where it was for thousands of years. It's sections at a time. And to me, that's really fascinating. This idea of something so old being passed around, and then it's like a brick in a wall for a while. And then, until a revolution comes and stuff like that's all really fascinating to me. I could have watched that kind of stuff all day. It's whenever it gets to the present day stuff where I think maybe a little bit of the magic is lost and the movie starts kind of wondering about itself. And to answer your question earlier, or your comment about what the movie is really about, Justin, I think it's the power of storytelling and stories to give our lives meaning.
Mm-hmm.
And when you have no other meaning, you can find meaning in stories and narratives. It's what we've always done, and that's what our nature is. Even though we don't need gods and religion anymore, we still have stories. They're just MCU or whatever now, right?
Very direct reference to MCU in there.
Yeah, exactly. So, to me, that's all really interesting to talk about, and I think there's enough here to where I enjoyed the movie overall. I do see the comparisons to The Fall. It's very visually striking. It's about storytelling. I think this movie's much stronger than The Fall. I think, except for the visuals, The Fall is kind of a mess.
Yeah, I think this has more to say, for sure.
Yeah, there's more to dive into. There's more to unpack here. Maybe not as visually striking as The Fall, but I'll take a slightly less visually striking with a better script any day.
Also, no Lee Pace. That's a strike against it.
Everyone loves that guy. I don't get it. That's all I'm going to say is I don't get it. I don't dislike him, but I don't understand the Lee Pace fervor that everyone has.
Yeah, I'm not sure what exactly. I think he was in Bodies, 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 and he kind of took the internet by storm in the last month or something.
Yeah,
but,
people like him.
Yeah, I like him.
But anyways, overall, I would say the movie's okay. It's George Miller is a guy that's hard to fit into a box.
Sure.
He'll do the first Mad Max, and then he'll do Road Warrior, which is one of the best filmed movies ever, and then he'll turn around with something like Thunderdome, and then Happy Feet.
Babe.
Yeah, it's what is this guy? And so I appreciate that someone like him can exist. Someone with the imagination and the gall to try and use his one for me, one for them method, and on the heels of Fury Road, create something like this small, epic, little, big movie. And
sure.
so I appreciate that it exists. I appreciate what he was going for. I don't think the movie's a slog like Justin seemed to, but I do think it's too long. And it's not even that long. I think it's 108 minutes.
Yeah.
90. Get it down to 90.
Yeah, I might feel better.
I think you have a better time.
I think that last third, I think that's the thing that you and I agree on, Mike, is really kind of where it loses its steam. And I think that's there's a lot of stuff to talk about in there with the spoiler talk, but that's kind of like when they're telling each other stories, this movie's, to me, is riveting. And it's that last third where they've stopped and things get a little, it loses its direction, I think. And I'm not even sure that it knows what it's trying to say, because I do think what you said, that it's like about stories. I think that that's one of the things it's trying to say, but I think that there's like 2 or 3 other things that it's also trying to say. Like,
well, we can get into that pretty quick. I think we've said all our piece mostly. Does anyone have anything in non-spoilers that they want to finish up on? It sounds like we have 2 not exactly enthusiastic recommendations, but 2 recommendations, and then 1 definitely no recommend, right?
Yeah. I would say not recommend. And I guess the only thing that we maybe could talk about before we get into spoilers is the question of genre that I have about it, because it is several different things. You know, you have fantasy, you have I don't know, I guess there's a romance. You could call it a romance, but I think like what I felt during it was that, like, in the hands of a different studio or a different director, I just kept getting these vibes of a movie that doesn't exist anymore, like things like The Lake House or like Time Traveler's Wife, you know?
I did think about The Time Traveler's Wife while watching this. Yeah,
maybe. I don't view this as much of a romantic movie.
I maybe thematically and at its heart, at the end of the day, maybe not. But just like them in the hotel room in the robes, just like, I don't know. I guess I couldn't quite read the movie, and maybe the context for that is that there were only 2 other people in the theater with me in a big theater. I think the biggest like theater that Alamo Drafthouse has. And I thought I was going to be by myself, actually. And literally the movie was starting and 2 other people walked in. And so there were lots of moments where I was like, is this humorous? Is this funny? Am I supposed to be thinking like that line was funny or that line was a joke or a quip? I couldn't tell, you know? Mm-hmm. And so I found myself confused a lot about genre. I don't know. Did you guys feel anything like that, or did you have a bigger theater? Was there pretty consistent like tone?
Well,
in the
I watched
room,
this.
Or?
I watched this at 11:30 a.m., so I was the only one in there.
Okay.
I watched it at 12:30 p.m., but yeah, I think there's like 2 other people in there as well.
But to answer your question, I found myself often wondering at the end of the day what genre it would be, but I don't think I was as in my head about it as it sounds like maybe you were.
Yeah.
Because it's such a weird, like, simple story that you know it's going to be some sort of morality tale or some sort. It's going to have like a. You got to wait till the last act to really know what you're watching. But I never thought it was like a romantic comedy or like a sweeping epic romance or anything like that.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think if I had been more engrossed by other things, I wouldn't have been turning that over in my head, because I think the movie was not clicking to the point where I was trying to figure out, like, I was trying to do some work to get on the same wavelength as it, right? So that maybe it would click.
Sure.
And it never did.
Yeah, it doesn't sound like it. Okay, so do we want to get into spoilers now?
Yes, please.
I think so.
Okay, so let's do that.
No, I guess Rosebud is just a piece in a jigsaw puzzle.
Any more cigarettes you got up there? I'll tell you all about it.
Things are going to start happening to me now.
And here we go.
Okay, yeah, Chris, you made a reference to this earlier. Why don't you get us started? That last act, what do you think what do we take from that last act?
Yeah.
Right? If not a romance, what is it?
Sure. Well, certainly is going for a little bit of romance too, I think. But I think it's, because it is about storytelling, right? But also, is it about her, because she had like basically an imaginary friend as a child, right? Is it about her losing her imagination in a world of technology and science? You know, so she had a imaginary friend as a kid, and there is probably a reading of this movie where the djinn is an imaginary friend, right? Although he does interact with other people in the world and stuff like that. But there is a reading of this where that's just another imaginary friend of hers, right? But as she gets older, he doesn't visit her as often, right? You know, like he will try to come and visit her. But is it because in this world of technology and science and like phones that she's losing her imagination? I don't know. What do you guys think?
See, that's kind of where I was coming from too. I don't know that she's losing her imagination so much as, like she was saying at the beginning during her little press conference, we don't need these stories the way we used to.
The narrative of science.
In our modern world.
Yeah.
They're still there for entertainment. Like, they're in movies. Like, they became, Thor became Chris Hemsworth in the MCU, like Hercules is whatever, we still tell these stories or versions of them, and they reinvent themselves over time, but they are no longer our religions.
Yeah, they're not explaining how the world works, right?
Right. We understand the artifice of them, and we now understand the purpose of them. We identify and move through the world and assign our morals and our realities and the way we understand things because of stories. Humans have always done that. Sure. It's in our nature to do that. But what happens whenever you go through a mood or a phase where you don't need the story, right? Like, you need it during your weak times when you need to make sense of things. I think it's her not needing the story like she maybe does at other times. Like, we live in a world where we can kind of dive in and out of our, I don't want to say beliefs, but how much we need meaning and to assign meaning to things. I think she's a woman who is very low at the beginning of this movie. And I think she uses these stories and the story that the djinn tells her to give her life meaning and etc. But I don't know that she needs it all the time.
Right. And I think there's something that it's saying too along those same lines, but a little bit tangentially, is like it seems to be more than maybe technology and science being necessarily the thing that's stifling her. I think it's just more knowledge in general, because in the story where the girl wishes for all the knowledge in the world, we have the very clear parallel of her legs starting to shake as she's reading.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And she's reading in like the same manner, and
very fast comprehension on these readers in this movie. I'm like, God, they read so much faster than I do.
Yeah. But there's a whole like science, I think, behind like speed reading and reading comprehension and stuff that I know a little bit about, but like it's weird when you dive into like different methods of reading quicker and stuff. I've never actually taken the time to try it because it seems exhausting to learn. Like, I've tried.
I took a speed reading course in college.
Yeah.
And all it ended up doing was like, I like read half a book, or I read a book and only remember half of it because I was speed reading it.
Like, I've tried it and I'll read through a page and then I don't know what happened. And I think it takes a lot of exercise, but that's neither here nor there, I think.
Yeah,
but
sure.
But like, knowledge of stories almost keeps her from, fully investing in the stories that he's telling. She's always like a step ahead, right? Mm-hmm. There's always these little moments where she's like, and then this happens, right? And he's like, yeah, and then that happened. Thanks for, jumping ahead as I was building up artfully. But I'm wondering just how much this movie is about people like us too, who like, we've studied film to a degree and we've seen so much film, and also just people being like too smart for films, too smart for stories. It's almost like there can be points of pride where we like hop in and say, well, I figured this out, and therefore the movie is lesser or something because I was way ahead of it. And, I kind of said the same thing earlier. So there's a bit of that in there too, of just like all of this knowledge is messing up your ability to like truly get invested. And I think there is a certain point in this movie where she does kind of maybe let go of that, or she's involved in the story so much at this point that she can remove herself from that scholarly view of story and of narrative. And maybe that's why she's overwhelmed, because I kind of had trouble with.
Is that where love comes in? You know, because love is definitely, like, is love real is the thing that they talk about, you know? Is it a madness? So I guess where does the love aspect of it fit into this these themes?
And I felt like that moment, while it feels like the most unearned thing in the movie, that kind of made me not feel like the movie jumped some stages, you know, of her suddenly wanting to be in love with him. I don't know if it comes from that, like, she's finally maybe out of her head and like actually having some connection and some emotion of the story is like overwhelming to her because she hasn't had it for so long.
Well, she has a desire all of a sudden, right?
Yeah.
Right. Well, she is lonely.
Yeah.
She wasn't good at communicating with her ex. It seems like they had a child that didn't live. And so he went off to be happy, and it sounds like he probably had another kid.
Yeah.
And so she has all of the memories in a little box in the basement with his name on it, which is sad, you know, like whenever someone leaves your life and all you have are just like, you know, a finite amount of items to know that they were ever part of your life.
Sure.
That's a good visual in the movie that I really responded to. But they say it multiple times. Stories assign meaning to our lives. And she's lonely. So what kind of story could she possibly be the most invested in? If any story was going to get her to that point, Justin, or where she's out of her, you know, scholarly mind and into a mood to be receptive to stories, it would be a story like that. Something to give her life a narrative, because we all need a narrative to go on, whether that's, you know, I want to make a family, or I, you know, want to, like, we all have some kind of narrative we're telling ourselves, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's what she most needs. An adventure where something larger than life, unconditional love, and all that stuff. But can that last? Can you be invested in a story like that at all times? I don't know.
Well, it is, the broader thing too is that most of the movie is a story that she's telling, you know, like the bookend voiceover for the movie, if I remember correctly, is the first lines and the last lines of a book that she's written.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So I mean, I guess there is a bit of, is this a story?
Maybe this is her first, you know, I mean, she was an author, but I don't get the feeling like she was a fiction writer.
So as Idris Elba tells these stories, and she accuses him, you know, several times of being a trickster genie, is he learning about her? And is that why that third story about knowledge is so similar to her? Is he a trickster genie and he's trying to, like, tell her stories that he knows will get her, whereas like he kind of misses with the first two, but that third one is kind of what motivates her. She's like, I want that love that you guys had with the knowledge, you know, like that love of exploring knowledge, you know. And that was actually one of the things that she had with her husband was she doesn't talk about like their intimate part of it, like the passion that they had. She talks about how they spent so much time together in books and like using their heads and in knowledge. So I guess the question would be, is he tricking her? Are these stories real, you know, that he's telling? I mean, obviously they're not real, but like, and is that what's happening here? You know, like, is he telling her a story in order to get her to be passionate about something? Yeah, maybe.
I mean, it's possible. I think the movie structures itself and ends in such a way to where it wants to be open. Even down to like kicking the soccer ball and doing that really crazy thing to like give you one last little tease of like, whoa, maybe he was real, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's very careful to walk that line. I didn't think about it so much from his perspective. Like, if I do this, can I get her to free me? You know, I don't know. Maybe by the end he was so frustrated he realized that this angle would be more likely to get him results down the line. I don't know. You know, I guess that's one way to read it, which I was looking at it mostly from her perspective and what she needed and what she was thinking, because I was thinking the whole time, I guess a little bit more literally, like maybe the djinn isn't real, you know? But, you know, there's plenty of argument that he was. And his arc being, like maybe it was a trick, maybe not necessarily a cruel one,
Right.
but one that would get him what he ultimately needs.
Right. And her, to a certain extent, what she needs. You know,
Yeah.
That's interesting.
If he's being a trickster genie, it's a pretty long con, because I feel like he almost dies, right? The right reading of that, like
Right, but
her wish that he finally gets her to make imprisons him and destroys him.
I mean,
sure,
not really, but I think I mean, like, if you go from that arc, right? Like he's playing a long con. I think the ultimate goal would be for her to wish him free, like she does. Like, I wish you to go back to wherever you can be normal or whatever.
Again, mainly, I'm talking about the hotel aspect of it, and at that point, they've moved on. You know, like the last third is really confusing to a lot of stuff too, and I think it muddles the points that they're trying to make to a certain extent. But for sure, in that hotel room, it feels like there's maybe a con, or like it's a possibility of that happening. And maybe he just doesn't know what would happen if he goes to London, right? You know, so
well, yeah, and but then I think we also have to focus on his journey, right? So, okay, let's look at it from his perspective. They leave the hotel, they leave Istanbul, and they're in England. They're in London, I believe. And he starts to live there amongst the modern world, and he starts to explore. You know, he sees the particle collider and doctors doing brain surgery and all kinds of stuff, right? Maybe the conclusion that he comes to is that this world no longer needs djinn. And he loses some kind of hope. You know, I don't know. Like, we live in a pretty magical time for someone who's been around for 3,000 years, you know?
Yeah, it's like wish fulfillment is less crucial.
Yeah, it's like we don't need to wish for, I don't know, health. We can go to the doctor, you know? We don't need to wish for, like, stories to be told to us because we have Einstein on TV, you know?
Yeah.
We have
wish to know the secrets of the universe because we have the
satellites
Large
and
Hadron
Google.
Collider. And,
yeah. I think it's just a lot, like, there's not as much mystery in the world anymore, so, like, what good is a djinn?
Yeah. That's interesting. Kind of reminds me of American Gods a little bit. The book that I read, you know, like I watched some of the TV show, but, you know, like, as the old gods lose their worshippers, they lose power, you know?
Mm-hmm. You lose relevance.
Yeah.
Yeah, which I think ties in with the idea of, you know, we know too much and everything loses its mysticism and power and
the mystery's gone.
Right. Well, he says he's made up of the same thing that our TV signals are made of. I don't think that's...
He's a transmitter, right?
Yeah.
Fire and... What was the other? He's made up of fire and something.
Like
ash
we're made of dust, and he's made of, like, a certain kind of fire. I can't remember.
Yeah.
Yeah. I did find that to be one of the more interesting things is when it kind of dove into the more literal interpretation of what a genie is. You know? Like, I liked that section where when he's forming, and I don't know why this happens later in the movie and not early on. I guess just because it'd be too much early on, but when we cut away to those sort of like title cards explaining what happens as the genie takes form, you know?
Oh, sure.
Like, it's like the title cards is like electromagnetic waves and, you know, atoms come together and form whatever, and
organs are developed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I thought that was interesting.
It was.
Not a detour.
Well,
sure.
The thing is, like, I mean, maybe a little bit, but, like, the reference to what the djinn are made of and what he's composed of being the same thing as our transmitters going on everywhere. That's obviously very intentional, right? To, I think, underline the score that he lives in a world that like really no longer needs him. He's a primitive version of, or we have primitive versions of what he is, however you want to look at it.
Yeah. I like the visual of the particles floating in the air and how that kind of progresses until she comes home. And we, again, as an audience, we're way ahead of her. And I think that's a good thing in this particular instance, right? That they've kind of set up those things that, we see her come in the door and there's way more dust particles in the air. And you're like, oh, that's not,
He's
this isn't good. Yeah. I like that.
Yeah. I mean, I think visually, I think this movie was probably pretty small budget-wise, because there are parts of it that just seem incredibly small, and some of it that seem really big,
Sure.
But I think for what the budget they had, I mean, it's pretty visually an interesting movie. George Miller likes to cast really unique people that are very emotive.
Yeah, it's good. And it looks good, I think.
Yeah. I mean, like, to my point earlier, I did not like this movie. I didn't really enjoy watching it, other than moments here and there. But like, I think talking about it is more interesting. And that's kind of how I felt, even watching it. And I was like, well, I think diving into the themes and the things that it's saying and the little hints and elements that they're peppering throughout the movie is more interesting than actually watching it. But I think that's, like I said earlier, a short story is great because there's so much to talk about and expand beyond what is there in a tiny story. And that's what makes this movie so difficult for me to enjoy, is that it just feels so stretched out. But all of the things within it is interesting.
Sure. I think this movie lacks focus to a certain extent. I think there's a lot of interesting ideas. And I don't know that it ever capitalizes on them as much as I would like. But that's why we've been able to have such a great conversation about it, I think. But ultimately, I think the visuals still, which is what I said before, but the visuals and just those two guys talking, not two guys, but that's the pejorative that I use. The two people talking.
Two folks.
In the hotel room. I just kind of really enjoyed that. And them talking about story. That's why I recommend the movie.
Yeah. And I
don't think you're wrong. And you're certainly not alone in that feeling towards the movie.
I stand by that there's a better, tighter version of the current movie we have.
Sure.
Like 90 minutes seems nice to me.
There's simultaneously a tighter version of this movie that's better and easier to watch. And I think there's also a version of this movie where they actually dive into all these little ideas in a way that feels more satisfying.
Yeah, maybe if the stories, I enjoyed them, but like maybe if those stories that he's telling tie more into the themes of the movie.
I mean, I think they do.
I know that the last one does. I'm not sure.
There are things that just feel undercooked in some ways. Like when she comes home and she has the two old women neighbors that are just xenophobic and racist.
That felt weird to me.
Yeah.
It felt like just cut those characters out completely. We don't need them.
I don't think they pay off, except for she offers them that food. But other than that, there's not really
it's like a slight one of those things like the soccer ball at the end, right? Of like,
that he's real.
That he's real because they react to him.
Yeah.
But the whole racism, xenophobic thing just feels like a tangent of like, it's bizarre.
It did give the opportunity.
It's like they just pop over the wall and they just start saying like really weird xenophobic stuff, and it's like, ladies, you weren't even being dressed.
Yeah,
leave Tilda Swinton alone.
I thought that would play into it more. Like they would be the nosy neighbors who are like, oh, she has a an exotic person over there, like that I don't understand. There's a black person over there with her, and like they were going to be offended, and somehow that would play in, and it didn't.
Yeah, it does give an opportunity because they're spouting all this racist bullshit, and the noise and the soundtrack kind of comes up to give us the experience of what it might be like to be the djinn in the modern world where there's just like you hear everything all at once. I just don't know that it works that well. You know, like
I don't know if that's the best way to represent it, because it's too distracting as like another point that the movie's making.
Well, the cast is so small that to introduce two old ladies in the third act, who aren't gracefully injected into the plot. It's like, it's like, what is this detour that we're taking here?
Sure.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying is like the last act, I think there's a version that works better, but it's a shorter version of the last act.
Yeah. I mean, there were several times that I thought the movie was about to end, you know? And there's a lot of fade to blacks.
Yeah.
Well, like the fade to black when it was like 3 years later, I was like 3,000 years. Oh, no, never mind. Just
I thought it was over. I was like, no.
I thought that was the title of the movie coming up, and then the years caught me off guard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then I was just kind of like waiting. And then when they were walking away in the park after the soccer ball thing, I was like, fade to black. Yes, they walk off and who knows what happens with them. And then it's like, nope, we still got to talk about her book and see her book. And it was like, I don't know, it was like Return of the King or something.
I will say, like at the end of the movie, well, I was at where they serve you, not an Alamo Draft House, but it's called like Film Alley or something like that. There's a bowling alley and stuff. But
in the theater?
Weird. Yeah, well, not in the actual theater I was in. That'd been distracting to say the least. But they brought in a check, and they said they would do it like 30 minutes before the movie finished. And I don't know. It was either they brought it in at 30 minutes and it just felt longer, or because it's like, there's still a lot to cover. You know, like I was like, man, they may have brought this check in real early. But
yeah, they didn't even get back to England by the time they were.
Yeah. They hadn't been to England when they brought the check in.
That same for me. Like I know generally Alamo's policy is they bring in your check about 30 minutes before the end of the movie. And they weren't even in England yet. So, sometimes it also tends to happen less than 30 minutes. Like I always know when that check comes, we're almost done. So that could have also been one of those things that just feeds your viewing of the movie. Cause I keep thinking we're almost over and it fades to black and then we're back again.
That's true.
Yeah.
So
that's an interesting thing to talk about, maybe in another episode, but like when they bring the check in, how it affects your viewing of the movie.
Yeah. I'm always like, all right, here we go. It must be close to the third
it's almost
act.
done.
Yeah.
Anyways.
All right. I'm done with this movie. I'm all out of things to say. You guys got anything else?
Yeah, I think we tackled it as best we can.
Yeah.
All
Another good conversation. Sorry you didn't like it as much, Justin, but
it's okay. You can't like them all.
Get them all.
Whoa, hey, stop it.
Yeah. Whoa.
Well, wait.
Are we finishing each other's sandwiches?
Sentences?
Damn it.
Oh, no.
All right. I think that's a good place to end the episode then.
Yeah, on that high note.
I believe you're right.
Okay, well, thank you, listeners, so much for listening. And of course, as always, thanks Jake Wagner also for doing our intro and outro music. If you want to hear more of his music, go to soundcloud.com/bopscotch.
Mm-hmm. All right, stay tuned to this channel. Our next episode will be a casually criterion over whatever wins the poll. Go vote. Noir.
Or something else, if something else more interesting comes out.
Yeah, we're not above that.
No.
Yeah.
All right.
We like jazz. We just riff.
Nope.
Okay. Thanks so much for listening, guys. We will see you next time.
Bye-bye.
Bye.